in it since we've.
Thank you so much, Peter, and thanks everybody for showing up. And as Peter and I have joked over the last couple of days preparing for this, I know everybody's probably a little bit Zoom meeting or WebEx meeting fatigue, but we do appreciate everybody showing up that can and can make time. And you'll notice in a couple of these, there'll be some slides that kind of relate to the 2019 kickoff. What we wanted to do with recent changes in 409A, Peter and I wanted to kind of pull out some of the information that we had gone over in the past. So I apologize for some inconsistencies in this, but for the most part, I think you'll find that the information is really telling, and I'll try to weave into it as much as we possibly can the most recent changes in 49A and things of that nature. So what we're trying to really talk about here is IUL University, and what IUL University is. It just talks about the idea of the product, right? The using of IUL, the performance bonuses, the way they affect the products, and what's really important to me. And not that anyone here has met with me. Again, I don't know, unfortunately, right, with who's on the WebEx, but what I want to make sure I say is the overarching theme here is. No product out there, at least, and this is an opinion of mine, obviously, I don't think there's any product out there that's wrong. I think that there are products along a scale of aggressiveness and conservatism, and we're going to fall at one end of the spectrum, and other products are going to fall at the other end. So when we use those contracts as alternatives, it's not to say that we're good, they're bad. That really is not the intent. It is to show our indifference to those. And as I always say, there's a lot of investment funds out there, mutual funds out there, and some of them are really conservative, and as Peter pointed out, are vanilla, and some are not. And not one fits everybody. If one fit everybody, we would have all been, in the Fidelity account that years ago, and then that would have been it. And that's not the case. So I just want to make sure that I give that as the overarching feature, because it's not an intention of mine in any way, shape, or form to say one company is better than the other. So with that being said, if there's any questions, feel free to ask. I'm of the attitude rather you jump in and ask at the moment when we're talking about it, so we don't have to search back after the fact. So please feel free to reach out. So IUL performance is, as you'll notice on this slide, IUL performance is largely affected by bonuses. Almost all of the contracts out there have bonuses. Some have very few, some have more, some have guaranteed bonuses, some don't. So what you'll notice here is the bonuses are product differentiators, and they are positive selling points, because ultimately the products can perform very well with the bonuses. They're going to generally credit, a higher return than the index option actually returns. And that's kind of where the rubber hits the road here, because the question becomes is one begets the other. Because these bonuses are generally what we consider multipliers, if the rate of return is X, depending on the amount of multipliers we have or that you or your client are comfortable with, what are you going to be comfortable with in the product's performance? As I mentioned, bonuses can be both guaranteed and non-guaranteed. And then there's this illustrated rate, this AG49A, and this will be the first place where I really talk a little bit about AG49A. So obviously, as we all know, AG49 initially wanted to limit the amount of returns that can be shown in a IUL contract. I think largely that it worked, because when I had first started selling IUL or competing against IUL, in fairness, back in probably 04 or 05, the reality is the IULs were getting run at very high rates of return, 9.5%. So now ultimately AG49A brought that down to a more regulated number. Of course, through these multipliers and such, carriers kind of worked a way around it. So the new AG49A wants us to really limit what you can show in an illustration. What's important to note here is that, and this is an important piece, and one of the reasons why it's so good to have a general agent that you're working with. So some of the contracts are changed. Some of them are not changed, only the illustration is changed. So it really becomes incumbent upon Peter and his team to kind of outline for you who's changing a product or whose product is the same, and it's just an illustration. So it's just a software game. This is the way bonuses generally work. This is ours in year 11, because the only bonus we have is a persistency bonus starting in year 11. Ours happens to be guaranteed. And so you'll see here, calculation wise, it's very straightforward. The crediting rate was 6.12. The persistency bonus is 15%. So they just multiply it by 1.15. There's a 7.03% plus an interest credit of 50 basis points based on what was attained in that level of year from that segment. And then the illustrated crediting rate is 7.53. That is then credited to the account, the segment account at the end of the year. So just the segment account at the end of the year after charges come out. We actually use, though, the value at the beginning of the segment, just as a little nuanced difference between us. So here's, what we're talking about in terms of contributing factors to IUL. And I think what's important here is to just show the differences in illustration rates. And this is important. And this is where I talk about the fact that no one product's better than the other. They're just different. So for instance, and I'll try to explain the three for you. And I think what I would ask that you take away from this is not so much, again, one is better than the other, but it's to speak to Peter and his team about, okay, listening to that talking head recently on your WebEx, ask these questions. And so let's go through that. You'll notice that our crediting rate here on this accumulation product is 6.12. Now, starting in year one, right, it's assuming this, obviously you see that the 1035 exchange and the return on the contract. You'll see our rate is there is 6.6% until you get to year 11 when the persistency bonus kicks in at 7.5. Now, Pac Life's PDX, their crediting rate is 5.76. You'll notice how it goes up pretty dramatically, right? Starting at 5.6, ending at 14 in year 11. Ooh, sorry, do we have a question? No, okay. Going to 14 in year 11. That's based on their multipliers. So the question, of course, as I would ask is, okay, so, what are the multipliers? How is it calculated? Guaranteed or not guaranteed? And then John Hancock, which is also 6.12, you'll see there starts at 9.25, doesn't get much higher than that 9.34. But again, are they guaranteed? And in Hancock's case, for instance, they are a guaranteed rate. So the reality is that you may have a charge issue, but it's guaranteed. And what you'll notice there is at the bottom, just showing kind of the difference in cash values. They're all getting pretty close. We're at 733, Hancock 736, PAC 688. The real thing I want you to take away from this is that right-hand column. If we can, maybe somebody's busy. I got a busy signal. Somebody can mute their phone. Apologize. The 20-year cumulative charges is really the key that I want you to take away from this. We happen to be 78. The other two are a little bit higher because of their charges internal to the contract. Why that's important is simply this, is that as the contract performs, as the market goes up and down, how do the charges affect the contract? Because if you've got an aggressive client and they say, you know what, I'm going to more than offset those charges because I'm going to take these higher rates of return and higher multipliers, then that's perfectly fine as long as the client knows that, right? If a client is more conservative and says, you know what, I'm uncomfortable with what's going on in the market now. Obviously, the politics of the world is in every single day is in front of all of us. If that's a concern, then maybe you go with the more vanilla symmetric contract. The key there is we want you to take away from this charges, guarantees, and effects on the contract. So as I had mentioned, obviously what can make it underperform? It could be changes to performance bonuses, caps, participation rate decreases, and cost increases. Now, market conditions are obviously something that we always lived with because they are the market. The other three, and some obviously are all related to or derivative of the market. But they are all up to the clients, meaning the insurance companies. So for instance, if a carrier were to increase their COI rates, well, obviously there's more charges going to the company, less obviously available for the index segment. Caps, participation rates. These are obviously the participation rates of how much is participating towards the bonus. Caps are obviously the amount that you're currently available to get, depending on the way the index performs. Caps, and we don't want to get too involved here in this particular scenario, but caps, because of the costs of options, option costs are going up, so therefore caps are going down. You've got less ability for insurance companies to earn money in the bond market. That's been affecting things like guaranteed UL, and it's also been affecting things like caps. So those can go down. And of course, changes to performance bonuses. Carriers can say, well, if our bonus isn't guaranteed, we may not get rid of it, but we may just lower it. Or we may change it, right? We can manipulate it. So this goes to your scenarios of, as an advisor, are you comfortable with insurance companies or not comfortable with insurance companies, or comfortable with certain ones and not certain other ones? Because ultimately, there's, if you don't mind and you're saying, look, these companies have always answered on their promises, you can go with whatever company you want. If you're concerned about the way companies have changed or added things like that, change their products, then you want to have ones that have more contractual obligations that are guaranteed. So again, the goal here is to say, let's ask the right questions about what product we're showing, rather than just going necessarily for the largest numbers, certainly in the accumulation world. So with that being said, what we strongly recommend is stress testing the contracts. So the reason we show 85 and 70%, pretty straightforward. Well, I'm going to use 70 as the most, as the one that we really talk a little bit more about, and I'll explain why we use three levels. 70% was based on an article that we can send out to you. And I want to say, I think it was Insurance News, but I can find exactly where it was, but I have a copy of the article, and it discusses that given the different cap rates, if we reduced every contract from whatever rate they're run at to 5 or 5.5%, how fair is that if companies have different cap rates, right? Based on the sequencing of returns, it would be much more fair to use a percentage. So that way, every company with different cap rates has the ability to show their performance at the same rate of reduction in the market. The reason that the company that put out the article came out with 70% was because the index, the S&P, was positive approximately 70% of the time. So that's where that came from. 85% was it was just an in between, right? Between 70, between 100, what do you want to show your client? So let's show different levels of reduction. Now, what you're going to see now, these are the changes with all of these contracts, based on this gentleman here. Again, this age 45-year-old single, this is the SIP design, simply meaning a single premium. This is that 200, supplemental income plan. Apologize. If you look at the bottom, you'll see 25,000 for 20 years, minimum non-MEC death benefit, and then standard distributions 21 to 40. Now, what you're seeing here is, so American General came out very good, 78,000. We were at 82. You'll see at the bottom there, there's some really big numbers. Hancock 95, PAC 81.91 for Allianz. Now, but when you flip it and you now show a 70% rate of return, you could see that what we manage this by is the charges, or the percent change in distribution, right? So, and you'll see, if you look at the charges all the way to the right, the 20-year cumulative charges, it's almost right, a direct inverted scenario here. You'll notice, obviously, the largest in terms of income at the beginning at 100% of the AG 49 rate now becomes some of the lower, because they have the highest charges, with the largest reductions in overall performance. Again, it's not, as I say here, this is solely a fact based on amount of charges in the contract and the amount of rate of return that's needed to support that income stream. So if your client says, you know what, again, I've always been invested in the market, and I'll always share a funny story. When I was in compliance many years ago, and I mean many years ago, well over 20, we had a conversation with a gentleman that was investing in a VUL, and everything about it didn't seem like he should be invested in a variable product. He was in his 80s, didn't show that this was kind of the money that was supposed to be in variable accounts. Everything that the book says is not supposed to be a variable contract. I had to call him and make sure that what he was getting sold was accurate. And he said to me, I'll never forget it. He goes, "Hey, listen, kid, I've been investing in the market for 40 years. When should I get out?" And the point is that he knew exactly what he was doing. He had probably forgotten more about investing than I knew at the time. So this is just simply showing that if you've got clients that are risk averse, they may want to be at the top end of the spectrum. If they are more aggressive and they believe that the time horizons are going to more than offset the charges, they may want to be at the bottom. This is just simply to show you, again, what questions you should be asking of your general agent, knowing that your client is X. They're risk averse. They're a risk taker. What are they? What do they do? Okay, so here's simply just, I wanted to add this slide just to show you the difference between leverage and unleveraged. And I use Hancock specifically for one reason, because in fairness to them, their bonuses are guaranteed. So theirs becomes less of an issue about questioning the company and more just about, do I want or do I not want to have extra charges, right? Because since they've contractually guaranteed their bonuses just as we have, it's not a matter of whether or not the company will pay them. We know they are because it's a contractual obligation, just like ours is. Now it just becomes a question of, okay, do I want to incur the extra charges, knowing that for this product to work, I need that 6.21 because I need to get to that 9.48 in year 11 to generate that 412 of policy value. If you don't get the 6.21, right, everything kind of goes along with it. You know the bonus will be paid, so that's a non-issue, that's a non-variable. But the question becomes, is the charges that are associated with that bonus are there, and therefore, if you didn't have that 6.21, it wouldn't be there to then have the accumulation because of the multiplier effect, right? So one rolls downhill, right? One low is lower, then the next one is lower, then the eventual value is lower. Because you have those increase or that higher charge rate. So the question there becomes, which am I more comfortable with? Am I more comfortable on, hoping that the market does what we expect it to do, and therefore will offset the necessary increase in charges? Or am I saying to myself, you know what, I want to have the lower charges. I'm concerned about where we're going in the market, and I want to take one that's a bit more conservative. That's the real outcome of that. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So that's the difference between leverages and unleveraged products. So what I wanted to share with you is just two more items that Peter asked me to go over with you. And what the goal here is simply to discuss, again, 49A requirements, and then also just give you two sales ideas. So before I move on to that, are there any questions from anybody at all?
So Steve, it's Peter. I have one quick question. So we speak about the leverage and the unleveraged, and you can clearly see it at the different.
Yes. And let me go back to this
running
one.
it at the same rates, but you see the different rates of return ultimately paid out to the policies. If, as an organization, and we do tend to run everything at 80% of AG 49, are there other ways that we should be looking at these plans to try and identify the expensive ones other than reading the fine print? What do you come across in the market?
Yeah, that's a great, Peter, that's a really great question. I think the only other real difference would be the charges, right? Because when you're running it at 80%, you're already kind of taking into account the differences in caps, right? So you're already saying to yourself, okay, well, you're already saying you're looking at the differences in caps. So therefore, you're being fair that way. I think the only other alternative really would be the charges page, right? Because you have to look at it and say, okay, do I really want to have to offset that dramatic difference in charges too? Because again, this becomes the most challenge that you have with all of these products. Isn't really an up and down market. They're designed for that. They really have challenges with markets that are consistently in one spot or the other, right? So if you have a several year window, like let's say a 1, 2, 3 year window where you have market underperformance, that's when the real charges really kick in, especially because there's just, it becomes a spiral downward of not being able to overcome those charges, and they're more effect. So 80% takes into account the effect, but again, it's still giving the contract enough time to look at it and say, okay, I'm going to make 80%, but now you really want to offset it and see those charges and say, okay, that's great, I'm running 80%, but again, that's 80% but stagnant. You'll see, if you see the charges, that's the one thing, as I always kid with people, is there are plenty of guarantees in this contract. The one guarantee absolutely are the charges. So you have to really say to yourself, since I'm running this on a linear equation basis, i.e. an illustration, what can I do beyond that to look at the product? And if you look at those charges and see the dramatic differences, I mean, you'll see with some cases, some contracts out there, I mean, they'll be 3 and 4 times higher than some of the lowest cost contracts. So you really have to say to yourself, okay, I'm running at 80%, but if I get a lower rate than 80% in 1 or 2 years, what does that really do? Because I've got to offset those charges. So I would really focus, and I know there's a lot of third-party information out there. Bobby Samuelson is very big, and another couple of other guys that do some writings. They're very focused on charges, and I would say to you that that's probably one of the other things I would do.
That's great. Thanks, Stephen.
You're welcome. So that being said, I'm going to go back to the end here just so you can kind of see that the leverage versus non-leveraged. The 49A, AG 49A, as I mentioned, the two things that are coming out of AG 49A are this. One is it's requiring everybody, obviously, to run their product without multipliers. So basically, the long and the short of it is it's based on you can run a bonus on that. What the bonus, as long as your options budget pays for it, you're allowed to run it. So ultimately, what's happening is that everybody's contract is being affected, even with those with guaranteed bonuses, because in the event that the option budget doesn't cover the entire cost of the bonus, it's the ability to show it in an illustration is reduced. So a lot of the larger multiplier contracts, which are not part of the options budget, those are being taken out. So the result is you have companies like us that aren't changing the product, and the illustration will just show a somewhat lower rate of return in terms of bonus. Because we only have the one bonus, the effect is not as great as, let's say, a company that's got multiple bonuses not covered by that. So some companies are changing nothing in the illustration. And again, it's very difficult, I think, for individual reps out there. I mean, plenty of folks out there are doing the reading and all the research, but for me, I find it easier to call somebody like Peter and say, okay, what products are the same? What products have changed? Because again, it becomes a software game, right? People will look at illustrations and not know the backup to what's going on there. So you may want to kind of refer to your, to your guys at FAIU and say, is this product still a good product, or did they change it in the chassis of this product? So I've got to worry about the way it's going to really perform. Is it just performing on an illustration? So that's one. And then lastly, what I wanted to leave everybody with, and I try to be really respectful of people's time. I can't thank you all for being here enough, but I wanted to leave you with one sales idea that we're showing and we're having quite a bit of success with. So given the way where the rates have been, VULs, old time whole life contracts, we're doing very well with loan rescues. A lot of contracts out there have been heavily loaned. The whole life world is really what jumps out at people, because for those of us that have been doing this for 30 years or so, we know that the dividend rates started out substantially higher than where they are now. A lot of those contracts that were supposed to stop paying premiums have not. Those contracts have been often set up to go on to automatic premium loans. And so therefore they've been getting loaned out pretty aggressively, because those premiums still need to be paid. We as a company can take up to 95% of a loan to value. When we bring over the entire amount, you're actually paid on all of the money coming over, including that of the loan, because of course the cash value is coming over. And because we are able to take such a high value of loan to value, and because our charges are so low, we are in a unique situation to be one of the better go-to companies for loan rescue. So for those old whole life contracts that were supposed to be on that, again, that I can't use the word. So those no longer premium payment structures, those are very fertile ground to look at and see if we may be able to save the client from having to have those contracts continue to loan and potentially get towards a lapse. VULs, we've seen those quite a bit. And of course, the old IULs, or the old ULs, even the standard ULs from back in the day that were getting shown at 9s and 12s before we moved into the variable life and the index world, right? The old standard UL contracts that some people still have. So I would tell you that if you're going to look at one thing for us, aside from obviously in this particular scenario, the supplemental income retirement plan, which I'll just go back on that slide there just to show you the performance of our contract in terms of this, even at a lower rate of return. But ultimately, I would strongly recommend you look at us in loan rescues. It's a wonderful contract, a wonderful concept to go back to your clients and talk to and say, we have these old contracts on the books. Let's take a look at them. And with the new way in which we've moved towards entire virtually selling, if you are so inclined, you never really need to even see the client, right? So if the clients are concerned about the pandemic, which it's fair they can be, and certainly if they're older and things of that nature, these are clients that may be concerned. We could do everything virtually. So the reality is that DocuSign applications, all of that can be done virtually with very little challenge to the client. So with that, I will kind of leave off my presentation, and again, just give you another moment or so for Peter and anybody else if they've got any questions.
Thanks, Stephen. Great insights. Love the sales idea. I have muted most people, so if you have questions, please unmute yourselves.
Steve, I have a question. This is Denise.
Sure.
We're starting to see Nationwide come into this space, and I was wondering how your product compares relative to, the designs you were showing versus Hancock and Pack. What if you put them in the equation? How do they stack up versus you?
Hancock and Pack or Nationwide?
Nationwide, I was saying, you that same model.
Yeah, I would have to do a review for you of their particular product. I don't know that I know enough about it to be fair to them. So far, what we've shown is that as Peter mentioned earlier, we're very vanilla. I would argue probably Nationwide is probably fairly vanilla. You generally don't see a lot of aggressive moves from them either. So I would say if I just had a guess at first blush, and I could certainly find this out for you with my competition desk, I would probably say they would be more towards us as a contract than, let's say, towards the more aggressives, Lincoln, Hancock, Allianz, and Pack as shown on this particular slide.
Yeah, I would be curious if you took that same
Sure.
slide where you were showing those, how that and I believe it's true that they'd be closer to Symetra, but how that actually looks versus what you would look at.
I will actually, I'm happy to take that back, Denise, no problem at all. I will take that back. I will have my competition desk run it as long as we have their software, which we generally do, and we'll show you a head-to-head.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and Denise, just to echo what Stephen was saying, Nationwide does tend to be a more vanilla type chassis, and but it'll be interesting to see what Symetra's desk comes up with.
Yeah,
but it definitely is. And I think just from just to add to the loan rescue and not even loan rescue, as we've worked with a number of our clients, as a number of people coming out of the whole life space who've done a good job in that particular chassis, who are now getting into those last 10 years prior to retirement, want to potentially boost the accumulation phase and ultimately get into that withdrawal phase. We're seeing remarkable differences, and Symetra comes out near the top in most of our analyses. And in addition to that, one of the things that I will share with everyone on the call, where we sometimes have difficulty in placing premiums in excess of $1 million, Stephen has been very helpful in being able to speak with his team to take some of those amounts, $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, etc. So just something worth bearing in mind when you get into those bigger premiums.
Absolutely.
Steve, do you have, is the cap $1 million now? And is it on a case-by-case basis? Could you just expand on that just a little bit?
Sure, certainly. There's no listed cap. If you ran an illustration with us that was over $1 million, it would simply say you need to have it approved. So ultimately what we do is we take it back, we package it, and we give it to our actuaries, and they review it for pricing. Ultimately, what you'll find a good rule to go by, if it's IUL, we have a lot more leeway than the GUL, just so you know. But I mean, generally what we're seeing is mostly IUL, both on the accumulation and the protection side. So it generally is a good rule of thumb. If you have is go by age. If you've got let's say an 82-year-old client looking to put in $4 million, that's probably going to be a tougher one, right? So I think if you look at the younger the client and the higher the amount of money is generally good. Under $1 million and under is approved automatically. It doesn't require approval at all by anybody. So we've had a couple in the higher ages, let's call higher at this to define this is like 75 plus, over $1 million, which have gone through $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $4 million. But if you use the gauge of age and single pay inversely, that's probably a good way to work. So the higher the age, you want to have a lower amount of money going in, and as you can expect, it's all because of profitability for the contract and whether or not the contract will be profitable based on life expectancy. Pretty straightforward, and that's true of every carrier. It's just, I like to try and give the full picture. Probably too much, but I like to try and give it all anyway. Anyone else?
All right, if there are no further questions or comments, we have recorded the session. I'm going to pause the recording, and Steve, I want to thank you not only for presenting in such a clear, concise manner, but also being respectful of people's time